It's good to see so many people here. I hope that y'all are enjoying your weekend, Labor Day weekend. Kind of classic that in America here we celebrate Labor Day by taking off and not laboring. But anyway, it was a good time had by all, I think, yesterday down on the square. I don't know whether any of y'all went down there and got to see the parade and walked around to all the booths down on the square around the courthouse. I was only invited to leave one booth. I go down there a lot of times just to spark up conversations. And of course, if somebody is advertising their religion, that's like sick 'em to a bulldog. I got to go talk to them. And so I did. And after a while, I think I used too much Bible. And so I was asked to leave, said, we just are going to agree to disagree. Anyway, that's the way it goes. I still enjoyed the conversation. They were very kind, by the way, very nice about things. So that's always pleasant when somebody can actually just talk about things and not get too terribly upset. That's a difficult thing in our culture these days. You start talking to people about things about which you disagree, and all of a sudden you got a fight on your hands. I mean, people are carrying signs and yelling and screaming as though that made their point more valid, which it does not. But nevertheless, that's the way people handle things, and it's rather violent and kind of a problem. In fact, I went around a couple of weeks here. I've been going around, and part of my visiting, I've been running by businesses, places of business. And I ask, and I meet the owners, and I ask the owners, hey, how's the hiring going? And I would think in a small town like Hamilton, where I would think jobs would be hard to find, it would be easy to find a job if you wanted to work. And I had a consistency in all of the responses saying we can't find people to work. There are signs out, hiring now. People just don't want to work. And I don't guess people make the connect in our culture about how detrimental that is to our culture. The idea of having a mentality that you don't need to work. Our government has perpetuated that by giving away free money, which money's never free. It's our money giving away to people who don't want to work, let's be honest. But it was a problem. It's always been a problem. It's nothing new. In 2 Thessalonians, I guess people have not gotten the context in which this statement is made, but I want to make a statement that I think is a solution to our social problem. And many of you have heard me say this on the slide. I'm going to go on record now, and so now I'm going to be in trouble. But here's the facts of the matter. If you begin with me in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 6, there was a problem in the church at Thessalonica. It was a serious problem, serious enough that Paul had to write them and tell them, this is a problem you got. He goes, but we command you, brethren. So this is not a, hey, you can do it if you want or don't, if you don't want. No, this is a command. We command you, brethren, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, that you withdraw from every brother who walks disorderly and not according to the tradition which he received from us. Now, I've heard this used and often, and it is applicable to those things doctrinal. However, if you look at the context, Paul is addressing a specific problem in Thessalonica. He said, for you yourselves know how you ought to follow us, for we were not disorderly among you. Well, how was that, Paul? What did you do that showed you were not disorderly? Nor did we eat anyone's bread free of charge, but worked with labor and toil night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. Not because we do not have authority, in other words, because a fellow preaches and teaches, and I'm real strong on this, he should be paid. You can understand why I'd be real strong on that. But that's a Bible principle. You don't muzzle the ox when he's treading out the corn. So it's not that they didn't have the authority, but he said not because we do not have authority, but to make ourselves an example of how you should follow us. In other words, we were working and providing for ourselves instead of taking from you what we have the authority to do, because we wanted to show you how you ought to work. This not working thing was kind of serious at Thessalonica. Then he goes on to say, for even when we were with you, again, we commanded you, this is not options, commanded you this, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. And that's my fix right there from the Bible for our problems here in America. Twofold. One, obesity is, there's no problem with that anymore. People get out and work. And second, no more unemployment. No more freeloaders. Everybody's expected to do something. This notion our government has, and I love our government, this is the best country in the world. Don't get me wrong, I'm a patriot. I'm a disabled veteran. I love this country. But right now, we have people, let me use that term, so I'll be nice, in charge, who are giving away free money to people who are not deserving and are not hard up. They're just lazy. And in Thessalonica, that is a sin. It's wrong. We ought to be productive. And so therefore, I think it'd fix people's problem if we looked at the fact that if you don't work, you don't get to eat. I guarantee you there'll be people willing to work. I read stories, I love history. I've read stories about the hard times in the 20s. All of the history and stuff that I've read couldn't match some of the stories my dad told me. Evidently, it was worse in his world than anywhere else. But anyway, he embellished a little. He was a preacher too. And so therefore, he would tell me about how hard it was during the 20s. But you know, you read the history of not being able to work. Long soup lines, that term came from that era. And you heard of people who were so hard up, they would, and of course I always like the approach that people made, so different than what we see today. They would go up to the back door of a house, not the front door banging on the door demanding. The back door of the house, hat in hand, and ask if they could do work for a meal. That's almost foreign in our culture because, you know, the government owes me money so that I go down the store and buy free stuff and then use whatever money I actually happen to have to buy beer and cigarettes. I've seen it over and over. And it's disgusting that our culture has come to this point. So when we get back to this situation here that was read just a moment ago, Ronnie read us John 9, we see Jesus. I realize this is, by the way, out of sync. We've been going through John and we're way over in chapter 14 and 15. But for Labor Day, I thought, yeah, I'm going to talk about work because that's an issue in America. So I went back to chapter 9, and I didn't do this intentionally back when we were in chapter 9 because I wanted to do it at this point in time. So I am backtracking a bit. But here's Jesus who has the mentality that you got to work, and he's working. He's always about the work that needs to be done. As a matter of fact, there is an opportunity that arises. His apostles come to him and say, hey, here's a situation, the guy's blind, whose fault is it? Now, he could have waxed long and hard about how theology and theosophy and how all of this came to be and how it was and then denied it. But no, he made a quick issue of it, a quick end of it, right? Briefly and bluntly. It's not the man's fault. It's not his parents' fault. Here's what it's about, the works of God, so that they can be shown. That's why I'm here. I'm here to do the works of God. And I like the way he states it in verse 4. Not that my liking it makes a difference. But it's really handy the way he chronologically puts the concept of work in here. Because we were created by God. Adam and Eve were put into a garden. And they were told to kick back on sauna beds and take it easy while everything was delivered to them. Right? Wrong. No, that dirty 4-letter word was used in that context. They were to work and tend. Yeah, both those words are 4 letters. They were to tend the garden. They were to work in the garden. God put us on this earth and he gave us purpose. He gave us production. And that's what we are about. If you are a human well-balanced in a society, you want to work, you want to produce, you want to be effective in that culture. And so many in our culture are not that. But nevertheless, Jesus makes the point, I must work the works of him who sent me. It's not options, any less than what Paul was saying as he reiterated the point. I command you, go to work. We're supposed to be productive as people. As a matter of fact, I submit that a great deal of discontent in our culture has little more to do with the fact that nobody seems to have in themselves a purpose because they don't work. It is amazing the purpose you will discover in yourself when you are productive. When at the end of the day, you can look back and say, here's what I've done. Look how effective that was. Look at the product that I produced. Look at the benefit to my human relatives and my kinfolk and my friends that I have done because I worked. It's a lost cause these days, I think, in our culture. Too many are willing to take, quote unquote, government handouts and sit back and do nothing And we have been catered to by our, well, it's the old Rome thing, bread and circuses. We get free stuff from the government and we kick back and watch the idiot tube and get addicted to it to the point that we can't do anything else. In fact, it's amazing with the internet and all of the devices that we have now, we can not only get addicted to the TV, we can get addicted to our phone. Have you ever watched in cultures when you walk down the street in down Texas way in the American country, Waco, and you walk through town and watch people as they walk through town? I was privileged to go with the guy here the other day to Temple and to Waco, and we went to bookstores, and I'm always looking at stuff, and I noticed when we got to Waco, we were looking around, and I was watching people, and they were like this as they walked along the sidewalk. Then we got in, and this was funny, we got into the bookstore. We're in a bookstore. And what do you see? People on their phone doing this. I'm amazed at how distracted that we have become in our culture, and we don't focus on things that need to be done and work that needs to be done because we're too distracted. That's the way our culture is today. Jesus said, I must work. That's what you do when you're human. And when Jesus came to this earth and took on this human form, in part he was human, and in that part he worked, because that's what you do. I must work. And that's work. That's not just playing at something. It's not hobbies. I know sometimes hobbies become our work and become very productive, and I'm okay with that. It's good. That's copacetic. But let's be honest, we need to work to be productive. But look at what Jesus said. And this is where I think the disconnect is in what Jesus was actually teaching here. Because Paul addressed the idea of working and not being a freeloader, okay, in 2 Thessalonians. But that's really not what Jesus is talking about here. And this is where our shame begins to show, I think, a little bit, in our dedication, our conviction in being Christians. Because what Jesus is talking about here really isn't physical labor. Let me show you why I believe that. In the first place, he said, I must work. But the works that he is talking about, the topic for the context, is the works of him who sent me. Well, now does God the Father care whether or not you're plowing out in your field, or you're baling hay, or you're waiting in the store and doing pharmaceutical things like Pete and Margie Pete would do, or things like that? That's productive work. Well, no, that's not what he's talking about here. Now, while that is a character trait that we should have as humans, and Paul reinforces that, that's not the topic here discussed. He's talking about working those works that God gave us to do concerning spiritual things. We'll see that just a minute in the next verse. But he said, I need to work the works of him who sent me. Well, in the first place, it's like that training that must go on before somebody does work. If you don't have training, you might make a good ditch digger. Now, I have been educated in my elder years. I have discovered my son-in-law's an electrician, and he digs ditches to lay his line. And he helped me the other day put some line out over here, and I was digging a ditch with my shovel, trying to clean out a ditch that I dug with a trencher. And he pushed me aside and he said, Dad, let me get in here for you. I don't think you're shoveling right. Well, to see all these years, I thought ditch diggers was the low end of the totem pole. Evidently, preachers are knocked down from that. So I learned something every day. But evidently you can use a shovel wrong too. And so apparently I was, and he corrected me. But if you don't know what you're doing, it makes it difficult to do the job, does it not? Part of the problem we have as Christians today is, what works did God give us to do? Now, it's not like he doesn't care whether we have we're gainfully employed. That's not the point. But what he cares about is not whether or not you work 40 square hours a week for your 3 square meals a day. What he cares about is whether or not your soul is doing what he wants you to do so that you can be blessed by him and go to heaven. That's what he wants to do. The works that he's talking about here really doesn't have anything to do with our physical work. He wants us to work for him and do what he wants us to do. Have you not read in Matthew, the 28th chapter? Where we're told to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. That's in Mark, by the way. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved. In Matthew 28:18 and 19, he says basically the same thing. Baptizing them, making disciples of all people, and then you continue to teach them. What works does God want us to do? Why, it has everything to do with loving your neighbor enough to want them to go to heaven with you. That's the works that needed to be done. And you know what? That's the context here. There are several things that give that away. Number one is when he says the night's coming and they ain't going to need any more work. He's not talking about physical work. He's talking about the fact that when the judgment comes, and there are many scriptures, we won't go into all of them, many scriptures talk about the judgment coming. There are some fabulous scenes like 1 Thessalonians 5:13 through the end of chapter 18. Talks about how Jesus is going to come back, the phenomenal event that's going to be, how no eye will miss it, no ear will not hear it. Everything that occurs at that time, every human ever will know when that event arrives. And so there's going to be a time when it doesn't matter anymore. Once you have passed that particular time, and for those of us that are still alive before the Lord comes, it's when we pass from this existence to the next in preparation for heaven or hell. And at that point in time, you're not going to be able to do any works. You're not going to change your status. Your only opportunity, my friend, to work and to do what God wants you to do is right now. That is the urgency in my tone this morning when I preach to you about going to work. I'm not talking about getting you a job out here, although that's important. What Jesus is talking about here is we need to get a spiritual job. We need to go to work. It isn't about coasting, coming into the building and filling the pew. We need to be here to worship. Hebrews 10, and I misquoted that last week, and I had several call me on that. I apologize. Hebrews 10, 24 and 25, it is valid, it's important, it's imperative that we come and assemble. But this is not your Christian life. This is a minuscule little point in it in which we have the privilege to praise and honor God. Our life is about doing the works of Him who sent Christ to go out and tell people what's coming. It's inevitable, and we need to be ready. And if you're not ready, please let me help. You need to be ready. And so the night's coming when there's no longer any work to be done. And as a matter of fact, he goes on and says in verse 5, as long as I am in the world, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Well, now that sounds strangely like a text over in Matthew. If you want to look over there in Matthew, the 5th chapter, many of you are very familiar with it because, we teach our kids to do this. And we sing about it with them all the time. And it says, you are, in verse 14 of chapter 5 Matthew, you are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. They're not talking about how well you could toss a bale of hay. This is old school square bales. A bale of hay way up on top of a wagon. That's not what they're talking about here. They're talking about seeing your good works, the fact that you're a good Christian person, your moral values, your ethical values are sound and solid. You don't compromise the truth for gain. All of those kinds of things that are so rampant in our culture, those are the works about which we should be and about which we should be proficient. So much so that people look at us and say, and it should be easy in this culture, when they look at you and me and say, wow, that guy's different. He is different than what everybody else is. If we want to do the works of Christ, and He said, I am the light, and we follow light, then we're going to listen to Him when He says, you are the light of the world. What does that mean? We should be an illumination in a dark corner. We should be a light that cannot be snuffed out, that reveals, it exposes. I know that's uncomfortable for people. I know that. Nobody likes to be found out. Most of the things done that are not right are done in the dark, in secret, covert, under the radar. I understand that. But one of the jobs of a Christian is to expose evil deeds. Expose them for what they are. Call a spade, as the old saying goes. You want to know what our works are? It's being a light in this world that needs light worse than it's ever needed before. I do believe that this cultural trend of not wanting to physically, materially, find labor that is productive is merely a manifestation of the spiritual weakness we have in our culture that has just denied God, basically. Go ahead and say it. Just denied God. Put him out of our mind. We don't want to hear about him. We don't want to, because what that's going to reveal is we're not living like we should, and we don't want to hear it. Have you ever realized how hypersensitive our culture is? How quickly someone can be offended? And I'm not talking about the offense the Bible talks about, where I offend somebody because they saw me do something, and so they're going to do it against their conscience and thereby are offended. No, we're talking about offended. I don't like the tie you're wearing. I don't like the shoes you're wearing. I don't like the word you used. And therefore, since I don't like it, you need to accommodate to my likes, because it's hashtag all about me. And so therefore we have a culture that is so hypersensitive. Oh, folks, we need to understand, when you bring light into a room, the cockroaches bolt. They go everywhere. It's not a problem when that happens, by the way. I think our viewpoint ought to be changed a bit on how we look at exposing error. Error that just is not just something, oh, got that wrong, my bad, and we walk away. No, I'm talking about error that will get you straight to hell if you don't change the error of your way. That is where the light is really valuable and necessary. And what was Jesus' attitude? If we retract now, go back and look at this from a spiritual perspective. If we look at it from a spiritual perspective, then therefore I must work. I must. There's not an option here. If you are not actively being and telling folks about Christ, being a Christian and telling folks about Christ, you need to rethink your Christianity. Because you're not doing the works of him who sent us as emissaries, conduits of the truth for Jesus Christ. That's who we are. We are to be the light in the darkness. And we have rampant darkness in America today. You know, we used to talk about sending missionaries over to the quote-unquote dark continent. I'm not sure that we're not the dark continent today. I hope that doesn't offend anyone, but that's just an opinion I have about how far away we have gone from God. Oh, sure, maybe like on the dark continent, we don't have. I was watching YouTube the other day, somebody riding a motorcycle through Africa and going up to these strange houses in Tobiah or someplace over there in Africa. They have these little piles of mud sitting out by their house, and they got two holes poked in it, and that's a god that protects their house. And they offer dead chickens and things like that in front of them because that's the god that protects their house. Yeah, we don't have lots of that in America, but I'll tell you, we have our gods and we have our idols, and it's so unfortunate. But you know, they're not going to get out of it by themselves. There are so many people in this country right now today who are struggling so hard with life itself. I was reading stats on suicide. It ought to scare us. How many people have decided there is no God, I have no value, and I'm not feeling good, so I'm gone. And that's the way people look at it sometimes. You know, the only healing for that is when we begin to do the work of him who sent us. And let people know, oh, this is not the end of it. This is so temporary. It's like that teapot with the mist and the steam of vapor. It's there for a moment, and you see it just sure as the world, and then all of a sudden it disappears. That's what we are right now. The real life we're going for, oh, it's so much better. And this is where I would get off and preach you another whole sermon on heaven, because it's awesome. How can you not get excited and thrilled about going to a place where there is no more pain? I'm looking at some gray heads out there going, yeah, right? No more pain. No more crying because we lost someone we love. None of that. And yet we sit here in this culture because I'm afraid a whole lot of Christians have lost their purpose and forgotten what our real work is. So I'm bringing this up on Labor Day. I know America's quick. We're going to have a holiday tomorrow. A lot of folks won't be working because it's Labor Day. But folks, Jesus had the right idea. We need to work now because there is going to come a time. Don't know when it'll be. Nobody does, only the Father. But when it comes, our work will be done. We need to work now for those precious souls for whom Jesus Christ died, just like me and you. We need to work now to reach out to them in love and kindness and firmness. And then, like I was at the booth yesterday, if I'm invited to leave, I leave, but I have left them with a glimmer of light. And if somebody wants to see the truth, it's there to be seen. If you're not doing the works you ought to be doing, I would follow Jesus' example and recognize you ain't got much time. It's time to go to work now. We need to tell people. We need to be involved with people. We need to influence people. We need to be an example for people and do the works that Jesus intended for us to do when he said, I must work the works of him who sent me. You and I must also. If you're not being the Christian you should be, and you need the prayers of the church, we offer an invitation song for that matter. If you know what you need to do to become a Christian and you're not, then we invite you to come too. If you don't know, please ask somebody. Please ask a member of the church, why is it that you have that hope that passes, the peace that passes all understanding, that looking forward to a place so beautiful as heaven? And you just might even throw in how beautiful heaven is, because it's going to be a wonderful place for me and you to go if we are willing to work. If you want to respond, won't you do so as we stand and we sing?